this world. Now the rule seems coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. This is the World Cup is over edition. I'm one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, Machel Santokie, and with me as ever is my partner in crime, Santokie Nagilendran. Santokie, how you doing?
Yeah, Mash, this is the sleeping patterns have returned back to normal edition. Body clocks back to normal edition. No longer will we be staying up in the middle of the night to watch West Indies, because West Indies unfortunately have been eliminated from the T20 World Cup in what was essentially a quarter-final knockout game with South Africa. They lost by 3 wickets on DLS. Obviously, we've had a few days to process it, kind of look at where things went wrong. And we're here to sort of discuss everything, Mash. The positives to take from this campaign, the negatives, looking forward beyond the World Cup, how the West Indies sort of rebuild under Darren Sammy. Now, Mash, I guess the first thing to sort of talk about, the overarching theme is, you know, a lot of people always say, oh, you guys always agree on everything. Like, you guys are always copying each other's opinions. One big thing we did disagree on was what would be... See, I don't want to use the word successful, because I guess for me, successful in a tournament, no matter who you are, would basically be winning a tournament. That is success in a tournament. So in terms of a job well done, you'd obviously said if West Indies could get out of the first group into the Super 8s, that's a job well done under Sammy. I said, optimistically, if we made it to the semi-finals, it's a job well done for me, based on, you know, the fact it's a home World Cup, recent form, the fact that we were playing 2 associate sides in the group stages as well. I just thought a job well done. A job well done would be getting to the semi-finals. Now, obviously, we haven't made the semi-finals. So, firstly, just looking at that, how would you summarize West Indies World Cup campaign, bearing in mind everything that happened?
I think we have to be objective, and I think there's 2 ways of looking at this campaign. The positive way, which is kind of something that Rovman Powell hinted at in his post-match press conference after the defeat. So the positive way of looking at this World Cup is to say 2 years ago at the 2022 World Cup, we lost to Ireland and Scotland and didn't even make it out of what is effectively a qualifying round to get into the main stage of the World Cup. Sammy took over in around June-ish, 2020. When did he take over?
Last year.
23, yeah. June-ish 2023. And to all intents and purposes, even the most churlish of West Indian fans would have to agree that he and the players have cultivated a love for the West Indies white ball side again, or T20 side. There's no love for ODI cricket yet, but certainly for the T20 side, they've cultivated a vibe and a love for the T20 team again, right? And regardless of the quality of the teams that we beat India in the run-up to the World Cup, we beat England, beat South Africa, lost 2-1 to Australia, and went into this World Cup with momentum and a belief amongst the West Indian fan base that we could do something, right? We made it out of the group, and that was no mean feat, because I think on paper, making it out of a group with Afghanistan and New Zealand was never going to be straightforward. And it wasn't straightforward, no matter how people say it was, but it was never going to be straightforward, and we topped the group. Made it to the Super 8s, and the England game wasn't close, but South Africa, it was. If you had said before the tournament started, Santokie, we're going to take it to the last game of the Super 8s, and it's going to go down to the last over, and that's going to be the difference between us not making it. I think most West Indian fans, given where we were 2 years ago, would take it. That's the positive spin, Santokie. Hold on before you jump in. Here's the slightly negative one.
Yeah.
Who did we even beat in this World Cup? That's just the that's the slightly negative one, right? And the only reason I say that, because I'm presenting both sides. You, the listener, could decide where you stand on it. I'm just presenting both sides of it. the proof is ultimately in the pudding, Santokie. We beat PNG, Uganda, USA. Before a World Cup, everybody would have expected us to beat those three sides. You still have to beat them, but the point is everyone would have expected us to beat them, right? So those three associate sides, beat them, whoop them, cool. Afghanistan was a dead rubber and meant nothing. I remembered saying to you, I think we had that discussion after that game, and I was like, but what does it really mean in the grand scheme of the Super 8s? Like, no points are carried over, so it don't really mean anything to me. We still beat them, but it's a dead rubber. Then we lost to England and South Africa. So really and truly, the only game we won of consequence was the New Zealand game. If we're good. Now, some people will say, nah, Mash, you're out of order. You're too negative. But there's some who might argue that, Santokie. I'm just presenting the two sides of the argument.
I was literally about to say the same thing. If we're basing it on actual matches where something was at stake, because the Afghanistan game was a dead rubber, and I know people will say a match is a match. However, the mentality is a lot different when you know you're through, when you've qualified. We saw it in the warm-up games. We hit 220 against Australia. If it was something on the line in the World Cup, I doubt we would be doing that. Again, Afghanistan, there was no pressure. We essentially had a free hit against Afghanistan. We still played well.
Portugal just lost to Georgia. We've just recorded this just after Portugal lost to Georgia, right? Portugal don't care. They've already topped the group. They've already topped the group. They're already through. So dead rubbers, I always see them in a kind of funny, weird way.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're looking at competitive matches, the one full member nation we beat was New Zealand. New Zealand, even though they were damn bad, it's New Zealand at the end of the day. It's a full member nation. So if you're comparing it to the last World Cup campaign, where we obviously lost 2 games in the first one, we beat one full member nation, basically. It's almost like a weird equilibrium. But I would say, Mash, the fact that, I did say it's a job well done if we managed to get to the semi-finals. The fact, as you said, we got essentially close down to a quarterfinal where there were chances where we could have won that and got to the semi-finals. I still think it was a valid claim to say it's a job well done. I think if you ask Sammy, this would have been basically a par performance. I don't think it's a memorable performance. It's not a campaign where people are going to be like, yeah, remember when West Indies did this and that. It was very inconsistent. And I think that's summarized by the performances of the players. So I think in terms of overall, my overall thoughts on the campaign, West Indies, it was a par campaign. Essentially, they did what they had to do, but I wouldn't say it was a good campaign. And I think for me, I'd always said a job well done. A good campaign would be getting to the semi-finals. They just missed that out. So is what it is. If you're looking at the positives, it wasn't a down bad campaign. We didn't crash out. We managed, as you rightly said, something which is, tangible in the long term. We brought the vibe and the kind of celebrations back to the region. And I guess some may argue that's more important than short-term performances in the World Cup, because that's something that can carry on. If you're a young kid or a fan and you've gone to these matches, it's going to be something that instills that love for West Indies lifelong. So in terms of Sammy and the players, the performances, they brought the vibe back and that energy. But I just think this World Cup campaign, it was just, for me, it fell short of expectations, just because, like you said, we beat associate sides and then we struggled against South Africa and England. And I was kind of hoping, based on our form in the previous year, when it came down to South Africa or England, if you told me before the tournament we were playing both of them, I'd expect us come to at least try and beat one of them. South Africa was close, but we still lost. England was a complete demolition job. So it was a mixed campaign for me, Mash. And like I said, I still feel like it was a realistic evaluation to say, yeah, it would have been a job well done to get to the semi-finals, because it wasn't that far-fetched. It was fine margins between getting to the semi-final in the end.
Let's talk on something that I was at pains to point out.
Yeah.
And no one's come to me to apologize, Santokie.
Yeah,
I've been waiting for all of the TikTok uncles, all of the Instagram uncles. I've been waiting for the TikTok uncles, the Instagram uncles, the Facebook uncles. Before the tournament started, we've dropped lots of shorts over the last 2 months or so. And a couple of them went more viral than others, particularly one where I said, you know what, we're not actually that good of a T20 side, right? Or we're all right, but we're not world beaters. And I still maintain, Santokie, that some people allowed themselves to get gassed up by that 3-2 series win against England. And even that 3-0 series win against South Africa, when I kept stressing, but that South African team didn't have 8 of their first choice players. And I kept stressing, I beg we don't get too excited, because that's not their real team. And I kept seeing people make reference to, now we're ranked 4th in the world. Now we're ranked 3rd in the world. And every time people kept mentioning those things, I kept thinking that doesn't mean anything. Like, because ultimately, Santokie, you can win and I think you'll remember me saying this, you can win a bilateral series 3-2, but actually all that matters is, can you turn up in the clutch when it's win or go home? And if we're going to be I'm not being critical, this is more constructive and a bit constructive criticism. What we played in the Super 8s was England's full-strength side. What we played in the Super 8s was South Africa's full-strength side. And although, in particular, South Africa, we ran them close or could have won, England, no, because they won with 3 overs to spare. The point is, when it was time to play the full-strength sides, we were found wanting in certain regards. So that just tells me that there's still... Now, so, I don't know, it depends where you stand on this, Santokie. Do you look at it and go, well, that's just the ebb and flow of T20. Another day, something could have happened differently and we win both of those games? Or do you look at it and go, there's still things to work on. The balance of that 11 still isn't really what it should be. And that's the fine margins between making a semi-final and not making a semi-final.
Yeah. Well, firstly, to touch on the ranking thing, another football comparison is if you look at Belgium, they're always ranked 2nd or 3rd in the world and they never win anything. And it's kind of the rankings don't really mean anything because you can pick up points in games where, as you say, you're playing teams who aren't full strength, etc., etc. So yeah, I think it'd be foolish to say this side doesn't have a lot to work on. I think we saw from the performances overall there are things to work on. I think in terms of the bilaterals in the lead up, the one thing I think that would have swung belief in support to supporters is that sports, especially international cricket, is a lot about momentum. So I guess that momentum factor, fans were hoping could carry on into the tournament. Like you said, I guess finally T20, there are fine margins. For all we know, if Russell didn't get run out against South Africa, he could have hit the boundaries and taken it over line, and then we'd be having a debate about how West Indies have carried on their momentum in the World Cup and beat South Africa again. So again, it is like a sliding doors moment. There are fine margins, but I think I agree with your overall point. The performances in this World Cup, even if we manage to edge out South Africa, I'd still say you'd say at that point there's still massive things to work on, particularly with our batting, in terms of how we construct an innings, and we'll get onto that. The dot balls was a major theme that's been running through the side. So there are massive things to work on, and I think that World Cup highlighted, as you said, England, who you'd consider a world class, arguably alongside India, the best at the moment in the world, completely demolished us. There was no competition in that match, and that sort of shows the level we're at the moment. So a lot of things to work on for Sammy.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, let's touch on the positives in terms of individuals.
Yeah.
I'll just throw some names out there. I think Akil Hussain was good in the power play. And actually, Santokie, one of the things that stood out for me about the South Africa game, it was the first and probably only match in the World Cup where neither Akil or Gudakesh bowled well. And it's interesting that once they didn't give us our banker overs. Now, people talk about rain this and rain that, but the point is, once they didn't give us our banker overs of, I don't know, obviously it was rain affected, but 8 overs, 2-3 for 40 something, we were found wanting there. But I think in general, Akil played well. Moti was consistent. Alzari took, I want to say, 14 wickets in the tournament, so we have to give him his flowers as well. And then Roston Chase, who possibly was our MVP when we look at possibly across the tournament, without looking at the recency bias of the South Africa defeat, I think when you add up the wickets he took plus batting contributions, he possibly was the MVP. But you'll notice in that, Santokie, that pretty much everyone I've mentioned was because of really what they did with the ball. Even Dre took 11 or 12 wickets with the ball.
Yeah.
But I've got no real mention for batters, Santokie, because I think in the cold light of day, when proper analysis is done, I think one of the things Sammy will take away is the batting never showed up at any point. Apart from that Afghanistan game, the batting never really reached its potentials.
Yeah, definitely. I think Poor Man's the 4th highest in the tournament as of now, but 98 of his runs came in that Afghanistan game, and I know he put up 36 against England, which was the second highest, but overall you just felt it was an underwhelming tournament for someone of Pooran's caliber. So as you said, the batting never really, it was very inconsistent. We kind of relied on our bowlers, as you said, and there was no consistency. I mean, the only consistency is Charles essentially middling, playing slow innings and middling some runs together, but there was no real, other than the Afghanistan game, there was no explosive innings, headline innings, anything sort of that. No one could sort of build upon it, which is strange because usually in a tournament,
to be fair, we should say the USA one when Hope and Pooran destroyed them. So we have to mention it because people get in the comments and say you never mentioned USA. But I mean, we were always going to win that match because we'd already bowled them out for 120 or something. So,
but this is the thing, though. Again, like even with Shea Hope, like he's a good batter, but when he hit that score against USA, which no offenses against USA, we had a lot of comments, people getting us, this is why Hope should have opened from the beginning. We said he was a classy batter, and then the man went and got a first ball duck against South Africa. So it shows you like the levels to this. So yeah, we have to mention that because it was still runs are runs in the World Cup. But overall, as I said, even if you're poor, and I think you'd be underwhelmed that you didn't hit big runs in the South Africa or England game when it mattered.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll be interesting, again, like I say, when they analyze this, it'll be, I mean, you called it, you said way back before the tournament started, this is going to be a tournament where 150 is a good score. And how much, actually, Santokie, how much is this a weak argument? It's not my argument. I'm just giving an argument. Were we affected by the fact that players came from a down bad IPL where everyone was scoring 200 plus for fun to suddenly come into wickets in the Caribbean where if you didn't have a good batting technique, you were just getting found out time and again? Do you think that factored into anything? Do you think that factored into our historic dot ball problem that we came across pitches where actually you had to be able to stick it out and wait to earn your runs? And time and again on those difficult pitches, our players were found wanting from not being able to adapt their game to, you might just have to grind this out for a bit.
Yeah, I think that definitely was the case. But then every international side would have faced that problem because the bulk of their players would have been at the IPL. And if anything, it makes it worse that our players, it was on home turf. So we should have been prepared for what the pitches that had to offer. So I think that is a reason why it was hard for players to adjust from suddenly, being able to freely score boundaries to suddenly having to run those ones and twos, which we weren't able to do on slower pitches. But I think to use that as an excuse, the fact that it was in the Caribbean, players would have been aware of the conditions of the pitches. Like Guyana and Trinidad, we know famously, particularly Guyana is a slow pitch. So players should have been prepared for that. And as I said, it wasn't just West Indian players, it was every side. Pretty much every world-class team kind of had to deal with that. So yeah, I wouldn't want to use that as a reason, but it was that failure to adjust, that lack of preparation in terms of moving to new pitches. So I think this is a good time to bring up the match. The dot balls is essentially 57 dot balls, which is a World Cup record against South Africa. Bearing in mind there's only 120 balls in an innings. Essentially, we played a T10 match against South Africa. We said, listen, it's Trinidad T10 out here. Let's go for it. We'll give you 10 overs, yeah? Give you that head start, yeah? We'll come 10 overs because, Mash, there's no way. We cannot even think of it. There's nothing to justify 57 dot balls. Do you know how mad that is in a T20 match? To battle 10 overs of blanks. And I'm surprised this hasn't been mentioned more, Like, I know a few people mention it, but that is, when it boils down to it, that is the reason we lost. Like, there's no two ways about it. You can't play, unless you're chasing, 36 runs against Uganda. You can't play out 57 dot balls.
Like, people keep saying to me, why do you think this is happening? And I mean, I've attempted to give an answer. I think I tried to give an answer on Instagram. And I think I tried to say that I think it's to do with the pitches. I just don't think the pitches that we habitually play on in the Caribbean are conducive to turning the ball into the onside or the offside for one, or tapping a ball down to third man and running a hard two. I can't think of any other reason other than the pitches aren't conducive to being able to do that. But we've certainly, Santokie, been talking about this same point since the podcast started in 2019. And people have been talking about this point from about 5 to 10 years before that. So at this point now, we're talking at least a 10-year problem of dot balls, and just soaking them up. Now, when we had the GOAT generation in 2016 and 2012, you can go back to the stats of those tournaments, and we were soaking up dot balls then. And I think this is why people may now need to respect, Santokie, just who the GOAT generation were, because that GOAT generation were able to overcome their dot ball soaking up because they legitimately could all hit the ball out of the ground, some seemingly at will, right? This generation has some super talented players like Puran, but they're not the GOATs. Yeah. They don't have, respectfully, the capacity to just dot 10 overs out and still go on to win a match. So at this point, it is now a serious chronic problem that if we don't overcome it, put it this way, Santokie, now it should be obvious to people why we're so bad at ODI cricket. Because when you expand the game from 20 overs to 50 overs, we're just dotting out 50 over cricket as well. Like, it makes sense why we can't play 50 over cricket when we're dotting out 10 overs in a 20 over game.
Yeah, I think it's a gift and a curse that we're essentially the first T20 side, international side, to actually come up with a philosophy. So, if you think about the boundary hitting philosophy, which was essentially that we started, I'd say 2012 is when that World Cup is when it started. Essentially, the way the team played was in an over, if you can hit 2 boundaries, you're good. You can have 4 dot balls, but as long as you hit 2 4s or 4 and a 6, you're getting 8 to 10 runs. You just go on that. And that was built around, particularly even 2012, Gale was like, 33, 34. That was built around the fact that the player's strength was hitting boundaries. Not Chris Gale's not going to be running 1s and 2s all the time. And then that leaked into the team. But the team bought into that and it matched the player's strengths. Now, if we're looking at a football analogy, this is like when Spain played tiki-taka 2008 to 2014. It was fine because the players, Xavi and Iniesta, were built around that. As soon as they brought in new players who weren't necessarily suited to that system, but because it was ingrained in their philosophy that we have to do this, the players didn't suit it. So West Indies at the moment are in that thing where we won 2 World Cups using this boundary hitting philosophy. It worked to the players' strengths. We've kept that philosophy ingrained in the new generation. However, it doesn't play to their strengths. Brandon King's not the type of guy who can pick and choose when he's hitting boundaries in and over. He's got to run 1s and 2s. He's that type of player. Similar to, a Shafane Rutherford, for instance, or a lot of these players aren't suited to that. And I think, as you said, it also highlights that boundary hitting philosophy is a very risky one. And it's the reason why the GOAT generation are the GOAT generation, because they could pull it off. They were once in a lifetime players in the format. So I think until we reevaluate how we play T20 cricket and essentially move with the times, because I know England in particular, a lot of sides copied that big boundary hitting philosophy, but they've kind of adapted now to the changing landscape of the game. We haven't been able to do that. And I don't know if it's also partly an issue that Sammy was part of that generation that played that boundary percentage game. So I don't know if it's hard as well for him to adjust and come up with a new philosophy for the side. But that is essentially the reason, because like I said, King, Puran, they can run 1s and 2s. Like, they know how to do it. It's almost as if they're minded, like they're instructed not to do it, or they just don't think you should be doing it. You're relying on hitting boundaries. So until we see a philosophical change with how we play our T20 game at international level, we're not going to see that dot ball issue go away. Because as you said, Mash, it's been an issue for at least 5 or 6 years now.
So using that analogy about Spain, it's interesting that we've just entered everyone's always like, you two always bring up football analogies, but the game's a game. It's interesting that Spain in this year's Euros seemingly they've still got a possession-based style, but they've got Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal as out-and-out wingers in essence. And this is new for Spain, to see them just stretching the play and saying, now we want these 2 guys hugging the wings. We'll still pass the ball about, but now we have an outlet ball and we're going to play them wingers in quick and say, run at your fullbacks, twist them up, get the ball in the box, etc. So this is where I kind of agree with the point you're making here about we need, even if we're going to stay true to the boundary hitting philosophy, we need an updated 2025-6 version of it that incorporates other aspects of the game.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Moving it on, because I'm sure that little segment there is going to get some people commenting saying we don't know what we're talking about. But moving on, Johnson Charles and Andre Russell. Time for them to go.
Dre's. I would imagine Dre's retired. He's done. I don't know if this is a thing with like modern cricket players, because him and Warner have both done the thing where they're like, we're retired, but if we get the call, we're willing to play. So I don't know if that's just a thing now that players say, but I'd imagine Dre Ross is going to be retired. Johnson Charles is a tricky one, because you would say on paper, he's 35 now. He's going to be 37 before the next World Cup. Is there any point persisting with him? But at the same time, if you asked me this time last year, would Johnson Charles play in the World Cup, I'd have said no. He kind of made a late entry, and Sammy kind of showed faith in him. So it also wouldn't surprise me to see Johnson Charles play some bilateral series at some point this year, whether it's down to injuries or lack of other options. So I don't think we've seen the last of Johnson Charles in Maroon. We've probably seen the last of him in a World Cup, but I still think we'll see Charles in West Indies colours. And Dre Russ, I think Dre Russ, that was the last time we would have seen him in Maroon. I personally don't think we should see either again in West Indies colours, just because I think it's time to move on. Put it this way, they're the only two players in the side that are older than me. I think the rule should be, if they're older than me at this point, like that, it's time to retire and let the new gen take over. So I would say, for me, I think that definitely Dre Russ is gone. Johnson Charles could play one or two more series, but I don't think we'll see him at the next World Cup.
So let me read something to you. By the time we go to the next World Cup, which thankfully we know we don't have to qualify for, the 2026 T20 World Cup. Where is that, by the way? Do you know? Is it in India? I don't even know.
So it's in India, but it's in February. So it's less than 2 years, because it's preceding the IPL.
Okay, so 18 months away. 18 months away, the next World Cup. Let me just read something to you, Santokie. This is how old our players will be 18 months from now. Rovman Powell, just shy of 32. He might even be 32, in fact. Rovman Powell, 32. Hetmyer, 29. Hope, 32. Puran, 30. Rutherford, 27. King, 31. Chase, 34. Mayers, 33. Romario, 31. Jason, 34. Alzari, 29. Akil, 33. Shamar Joseph, 26. Obed, 29. Moti, 31. I'm not trying to say that you can't play T20 cricket in your early 30s. That's a lot of players who will be 30 plus, Santokie, in that team. And so, I expect the large majority of them will be playing 18 months from now in the next World Cup. However, I guess the reason why I'm telling you all those ages is, when are we going to start looking at the next gen?
Yeah.
When would you start? And I guess it's a combination of questions. When, who, and what should we be looking at over the next 18 months? Or do we have to basically say, you know what, well done, Desi, well done, everyone. Let's go again for the next 18 months. We're not really going to make any changes because the squad's the squad already. Maybe we'll bring through one man like a Matthew Ford, but we ain't really making any more changes beyond that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, based on their ages, you could feasibly go to the World Cup with that same squad, other than Dre Ross and Johnson Charles, based on their ages. However, if you do that, you risk a boys to menting, end of the road. It's the end of the road after that World Cup, and
although we go to the end of the road,
whole squad's retiring after that. So you don't want to be in a position like New Zealand are now, and where it's one tournament too far for a lot of senior players, and then everyone's retiring at the same time. You want to kind of build a contingency plan, so you've got long-term development. So that series against South Africa, Mash, in August, seems like we played South Africa a lot this year, but we're playing them again in August in Trinidad. South Africa definitely, it's going to be, I would say, it's probably put out a second string side. I can't imagine the first choice players after this World Cup in the Caribbean playing in August in Trinidad. So I would say that's a perfect opportunity for Sammy to start, not a rebuild, but blooding in the new players. I think Matthew Ford will definitely be a regular. It's a good name you picked up on. Maybe like a Naeem Young, maybe a Teddy Bishop, some young players that can come in, just to kind of, so we have that mix of experience and youngsters coming through. So we're not in a position where, regardless of what happens in 2026, we're in a position where players are retiring left, right, and centre. We've got a young group of players who can carry on post 2026. I think that's what we need to build. However, as we know with modern day coaching, a lot of it is based on short term results. So Sammy, at the end of the day, is going to go with sides that win bilateral series. At the same, that's his remit, because if we pick youngsters and we lose 2 bilateral series in a row, that's pressure. There will inevitably be pressure on Sammy's job, for instance. So I would like to see him blood in at least 4 or 5 youngsters that can come in, and then let's see what they can do from there, because the majority of this squad also played in the last World Cup in Australia. So at that point, you would have given them 3 World Cups.
Good point.
It's a long time for the same core of players to do without really excelling in the 2 they played in so far. And you're going to India, which is going to be very, very tough for a lot of these players. So, yeah, I'd like to see new players coming in. And I think that's something we'll probably do an episode on in the coming weeks. Kind of who are the new generation? Who are the new players that can come through?
It's worth mentioning as well that this is why that domestic T20, Caribbean only T20 has to happen. They said it's going to happen next year, but it actually has to happen, because as much as we can talk about new players, well, CPL ain't going to create them new players. It's all, everyone's been talking about it for the last 12 to 18 months. There are no new players. Like we could, like we beyond Alec Athanaze, Matthew Ford. I'm just thinking straight off the top of my head here. If we maybe take a gamble on a youngster like Isaiah Thorne, although it's way too early for him, the reality is, Santokie, this next set of players, they don't exist because they don't play, they don't get gigs in CPL. Do you get where I'm coming from? Right now, the type of players who are underneath these players who get gigs in CPL are people like Mark Dayal. And are we realistically, I know he went to Nepal, but are we realistically saying Mark Dayal, who, by the way, is also 30, 31, what, he's the next man coming through? So we
start that series against South Africa, Andre Fletcher, in a new open.
That's what I'm saying. So, but you can just by who went to Nepal, you can see that we've got some issues about who are actually the next lot coming through, because we don't have a next lot, really and truly. So it's going to be very, very interesting to observe how that all goes down.
And I think it was the final point. I think it was interesting that, the 2 sort of wild card. We always said before the squad was announced, there were 13 players we kind of knew who would get picked. The sort of 2 wild cards were Shimron Hetmyer and Shamar Joseph. And in the end, Darren Sammy didn't play them even against that game against Afghanistan. So he sort of held back on it. So that for me was interesting. I thought we could have potentially seen either one, just because the fact they were picked meant he saw something in them. And particularly Shamar Joseph, there was a lot of the unknown about him, but they didn't go for him in the end. I don't know, did Shamar Joseph travel with the side then across the Caribbean?
Yeah, I definitely saw him some vignettes and some warm-up stuff.
So then this leads to the question, did we shoot ourselves in the foot by dragging Shamar Joseph around the Caribbean to not play when he could have been focusing on a Red Bull game? I know the Red Bull side's in England at the moment, but they've been doing practice sessions in the Caribbean, then moved to England. Did we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot by kind of spreading Shamar Joseph too thin and taking him in to the World Cup? Or do you think it would have been a good experience for him nonetheless to be around that World Cup side?
Well, he should be someone, funny enough, speaking of who's coming through, he's somebody who we should definitely be playing in some bilaterals going forward. Although, obviously right now, the priority is the test series. In many ways, I'm kind of glad he didn't play any games, because it now means he's legitimately fresh to go to England and play 3 test matches back to back, you would think. The bigger question mark is Hetty. Now, I don't know where Hetty's ego lies in all of this, but how the mighty have fallen. This guy has gone from being one of the first names you would put in any West Indies white ball side to not being bothered to get on a plane, to getting dropped, to a whole big report being written on how he's like Dennis Rodman, to bringing him back, to him not performing, to him getting dropped again, to him then getting in the World Cup squad to not play any World Cup games. Put it this way, Santokie. If Hetty decided after this World Cup he's done with West Indies, I wouldn't be shocked, I wouldn't be shocked if he does, because it's all dependent on where his mind is at. And if in his head he's like, wait, I'm Shimron Hetmyer, I play for Rajasthan Royals, I'm big tings out here, and you, man, carried me around the Caribbean for 7 games and I didn't get to play not even 1 second, he might say, bun West Indies after all this. I don't know, Santokie. It wouldn't surprise me, though.
Is it? Yeah, because I did see him carry out drinks. And he was smiling when he was carrying out drinks. He didn't look like his body, but you never know. Like that might have just been because that was a public moment. So it's hard to know. And for West Indies, for the coaches, for Sammy and the selectors and sort of the staff around there, is this a case of Hetmyer having, quote unquote, paid his dues now, that he's kind of come with the World Cup side? He's kind of held the drinks. He's done what it is, and it has this essentially been what's cancelled out him missing the airplane. It's kind of been, like you said, shown that it's not all about his ego. It'd be interesting to see, and I'm sure Hetmyer will get a call up for that South Africa series in August, because as you said, Mash, of the ages you listed, Hetmyer is still one of the youngest, even though he seems like a veteran at this point. He won't be 30 before the next World Cup. We know what he can do in India, whether it be for West Indies in bilaterals previously or in the IPL. So he's going to be a valuable player to have. So it will be interesting to see, when he gets called up, if he plays, or is this the thing where it's like, as you said, I'm Shimon Hetmyer. Listen, the man pulled up to the IPL with big Hetty chain, it was the Hetmyer show. These times they're getting him to carry out Morby, from the bench to the players. So it'll be interesting to see the dynamic, because we don't know where his head is at. I personally, I'm sure you'll be the same. I'd like to see Hetmyer, fully committed to West Indies and playing in those bilateral series, because as much as people will cuss him out and say, look, we're done with Hetmyer, like we shouldn't be calling him up, the man's still young. We know that he's got world-class potential, even though, in my opinion, he hasn't fulfilled what he could possibly reach. So if we do see a committed Hetmyer from now until the next World Cup, for West Indies cricket's sake, that'd be a great benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, people, we said before we recorded we're only going to do half an hour. We legitimately could keep this going for an hour. We could do a live show, and I'm sure there's far more talking points that people want to hit on. But we're going to stop it there, because we know that you lot are going to kill us with the comments after this episode. But let us know, people. Let us know, what were your takeaways from that World Cup? Did West Indies meet your expectations? Was it par? Did they overperform? Was it just shy of did you expect a semi-final appearance? Who had a good tournament? Who do you think had a bad tournament? Who are the next generation that you would bring through? Is it time to bring through the next generation? Who are you retiring? And if you're retiring them, who's replacing them? And you know what we didn't discuss, Santokie? Even if if Dre does step aside, we don't actually have another Dre.
Yeah.
We actually don't have one. So as much as we can say bye Dre, who's the new Dre? Cuz like there isn't one out there. I don't even think we've got a new Johnson Charles. Like,
yeah, that's mad. Yeah, the fact that Carl Mayers wasn't even in the squad and we had to pull him up to come and
we didn't even talk about that. Do you know actually, Santokie, just before we wrap, let's quickly touch on that. Do you think that was the right thing to do? Because during the match itself, I was like, right, because I actually legitimately expected us to stay unchanged, for the for the final game. And the reason why I thought we'd stay unchanged is because in my head I was like, surely we're not going to just drop Johnson now. It's a must-win game, because Mayers only just turned up.
Yeah,
and then Mayers came straight in, and in my head I was like, rah. Man's just come straight in out the like he just got straight into the team. And to be fair to Mayers, I mean he scored 34 of 33 or something, which was in keeping with what Johnson Charles had been doing. But he looked like someone who had just come into the team, and wasn't like not match ready, but you could tell he hadn't been playing games, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. But like you said, it wasn't a bad innings against South Africa. He lost his wicket going for it. He was going for a 6 and got caught on the boundary. But as you said, Mash, he looked like someone who hadn't been playing games. He obviously didn't play in the IPL. He didn't get any games in the IPL beforehand. So essentially, he'd gone 4 months without playing any competitive cricket. And I don't know what the procedure with reserve players. So obviously, Hayden Walsh Jr. has been in England playing for Worcestershire. But I don't know the other reserves. Are you put under a program where you're still training, or is it up to your own independent ability to train and all this stuff? So we don't know what Carl Mayers was doing. He flew in on a Saturday night and then played on a Sunday. And like you said, Mash, it was for me, it was wild that they dropped Johnson Charles. After all that persistence, the big quarterfinal game, we just Johnson Charles. It's one of them things, like you said, it's one of them things where if it came off and Mayers hit like a 50 or more, it's a Sammy masterstroke, but it didn't. So now it just seemed like a baffling decision, because why are you going to drag Charles along through all of that and then just drop him at a clutch game? They did Charles dirty.
Yeah. They said to the man, wait. They said to the man, wait, you've played 6 games in a row. We've had enough. had enough in the must-win game.
So yeah, that was so somehow we've ended up as openers. We've had Hope and May as opening combo. So against South Africa, it'd be interesting to see who we go with. We still don't have like a number one choice pairing, because even in the build-up to this World Cup, it was questionable whether it should have been King and Charles. So that's a big thing to do. And I think, like you said, we've been blessed, Mash, for the GOAT generation. This was never an issue. We never had to find out where we got openers from. So yeah, that's something to look at as well. And it was a slightly strange decision to go with May. I can see the logic, it's not trying something different, trying something fresh, but it didn't pay off for us in the end. But anyway, Mash, that's it. As you said, short-ish episode. We've gone about 40 minutes. You've got early flight to catch Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Can't stop, won't stop. Mash, where are you off to?
Do you know what? Until you said that, I'd forgotten again, The people in about what, 5-6 hours or so, I'm gonna have to get up 6 hours, I reckon, to go and catch a flight to Ireland to watch it's called Ireland's emerging team, but it's actually the Ireland first choice side against the West Indies emerging or the West Indies academy team. I think at the end of day one, day two, sorry. West Indies were bowled out for 200 at the end of day one, and Ireland have made something like 370 something for 7. So I should be able to see West Indies bat again. So yes, a mad trip, Santokie. I land in Ireland at 9:45. One of the CCP community is picking me up at the airport. I'm going straight to the game, staying there all day. Then I'm getting a lift back to the airport and landing back in London. Landing back in London on the same day, getting home about maybe midnight, 11:30, getting 6 hours sleep, then going into work, cuz can't stop, won't stop. It's crazy out here.
Listen. No one can question Mash's dedication. If you want to support the movement, obviously we got a Patreon as well to support Mash's cause in trying to get as little sleep as possible for the love of West Indies. So yeah, safe journey to Mash, and hopefully it's a good game out there in Ireland. As you said, it's a strong Ireland side, but it'd be a chance, to see the emerging players in the West Indies academy up front and close in Ireland. So look forward to that. And obviously, Mash, next week is the West Indies warm-up game against the County 11 side at Beckenham. We'll be there probably across all 3 days. We'll probably be there, either both of us or one each. So looking forward to that. Hopefully the rain stays away. I know there's a bit of rain forecast, so hopefully that stays away and we get some games. And that we'll be looking to do content from Beckenham as well. So yeah, all good on that front. A lot of cricket coming up. Even though the World Cup's finished for West Indies, we move on now to red ball cricket at both emerging level and at senior level. So look forward to that content. Thank you as always. Like, comment, share, subscribe. As we said, we'll probably do a live show in the coming days to analyze different opinions on where we went wrong in the World Cup, and keep an eye out for some more content. Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Can't stop, won't stop. That's the new motto. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you're listening to in the world, whatever time it is. Stay safe, take care, and we'll see you on the other side.
Peace.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rules seem coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.